The airport was busy like always. People rushed around, dragging bags, checking their phones, looking for gates. Among the crowd sat an old black man, quiet and still, in a corner of the waiting area. He wore a simple coat, his shoes were worn, and his hands rested on a wooden cane. His eyes, though tired, held a kind of calmness. He didn't bother anyone. He just sat there near gate 29, waiting for his boarding call. A woman, maybe in her 30s, walked over. She had a loud voice, a sharp tone, and a crisp business suit. She glanced down at the old man, clearly annoyed. "You're in my seat," she said without a smile. The old man looked up slowly. He didn't argue. He nodded once like he understood, and tried to stand. His legs moved slowly, and he leaned, heavily on his cane. It took effort, but he didn't complain. He simply stood and shuffled a few feet away, leaving the seat empty. The woman sat down immediately and pulled out her tablet, not even looking at him again. Nearby passengers noticed. Some frowned, a few whispered, but no one said anything. 9 minutes passed. The announcement came. Flight 472 to Atlanta now boarding. First-class passengers may begin boarding now. People lined up. The woman in the suit stood up quickly, gathered her bag, and walked ahead with a confident step. She didn't glance back. But then something unexpected happened. As the line moved forward, the gate agent paused and looked over the waiting area. "Sir," she called kindly, "you can come now." Everyone turned. The old man looked surprised. Slowly, he walked toward the gate. Then a uniformed pilot stepped out from behind the counter. He was tall, clean-cut, and serious. The pilot walked directly up to the old man. He stood straight, took off his cap, and gave the old man a full military salute. The old man blinked, confused. He reached out, and the two men shook hands. Their handshake was firm and respectful. "You served, sir?" the pilot asked. "Yes," the old man said quietly. "Long time ago." "Not forgotten," the pilot said. "This flight has a seat for you." The crowd stood still, watching. The pilot guided the old man past the boarding area, straight into first class. The woman in the suit looked confused. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but no words came. She lowered her eyes. "No," one clapped, but the silence was heavy with meaning. The passengers began to board, still quiet, still thinking. Some of them would remember the moment forever. Not because of drama, but because of quiet dignity. Because sometimes, real respect doesn't make a sound. And the old man, he simply took his seat, looked out the window, and smiled. The side seat was soft, far softer than the old man had expected. He sat in first class now near the window. A warm towel was handed to him, and a kind flight attendant offered juice, coffee, or tea before takeoff. He smiled politely and asked for plain water. His hands trembled a little as he lifted the cup, not from fear, not from weakness, just time. He looked out the window. The runway stretched wide like a promise, but his mind was somewhere else, decades back, to another runway, another uniform. He had worn the same kind of jacket the pilot wore, only his had been older, rougher, and faded from war. He had been young then, strong. He had carried gear heavier than his own body weight. He had run into fire, not away from it, but now he sat quietly. No uniform, no medals, just memories. Across the aisle, a child kept glancing at him. She leaned close to her mother and whispered something. The mother looked, then smiled at the old man and mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded slightly. Not everyone knew who he was, but some could see it in the way he sat, the calm in his eyes. The woman who had told him to move earlier walked past him now. She didn't look him in the eye. She noticed his seat. She noticed the small American flag pin on his chest. She bit her lip and kept walking. Her seat was at the back. As the plane taxied, the pilot made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this flight carries a special guest today. A man who once wore the uniform many of us owe our peace to. We are honored to have him on board." The old man's eyes widened. He hadn't expected that. A few people clapped, then a few more, and suddenly the entire cabin was filled with quiet applause. He didn't stand. He didn't wave. He only bowed his head. To him, it wasn't about applause. He had seen men who never came home, men who didn't get this moment. So he closed his eyes and gave a silent thank you. The flight continued smoothly, but the young flight attendant couldn't help her curiosity. As she passed him again, she bent down slightly and asked, "Sir, if you don't mind, where did you serve?" He looked up slowly, smiled gently, and said, "A long time ago. In places far away. Vietnam, Desert Storm, a few others. Doesn't matter where. What matters is, I came back." She looked at him with soft eyes and whispered, "We're glad you did." "Me too," he replied. He turned his gaze back to the window. The sky outside was bright. Clouds passed by like memories, soft, slow, drifting. He hadn't expected anything when he came to the airport. He was just going to visit someone. Quietly. No one had noticed him in a long time. But today was different. A small act, someone telling him to move, had turned into a moment that reminded the world he still mattered. Sometimes it takes a stranger's disrespect to remind others to show gratitude. Sometimes it takes just 9 minutes to change how the world sees you. And for him, those 9 minutes weren't about revenge or pride. They were about grace. And grace doesn't make noise. It just sits quietly, holding stories until someone finally listens. The flight settled into calm. Some passengers slept. Others watched movies. A few scrolled through phones, bored and restless. But the old man stayed still, hands folded, his gaze resting on nothing in particular. He wasn't asleep, but he wasn't fully present either. His mind wandered, drifting through time, through battles, through faces he could never forget. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. The corners were soft, the paper yellowed. He opened it slowly, carefully, as if it might fall apart in his hands. Inside was a photo. Black and white, 4 men in uniform. They stood beside an old aircraft, smiling wide despite the mud on their boots and the fear hiding behind their eyes. He touched each face on the photo with his finger, one by one. He was the only one still alive. As he held the picture, the man, in the seat beside him, a middle-aged fellow with glasses and a quiet look, glanced over. "I don't mean to intrude," the man said gently, "but were those your friends?" The old man didn't answer right away. Then he nodded slowly. "We trained together, fought together. Only I made it back." There was a silence. The man beside him placed his tablet down and said softly, "Thank you for everything. My dad never came home from Vietnam." The old man turned his head slightly. "I'm sorry," he said. "He was probably a good man." "He was," the man replied. "And so are you." It was quiet again, but not empty. Some silences carry more weight than words. A few rows behind, the little girl who had stared earlier now asked her mother, "Why did the pilot salute that man?" Her mother bent down and whispered, "Because he did something very brave when he was younger." "Like a superhero?" the girl asked. "Even better," the mother said. "He's real." The old man didn't hear the words, but he felt the warmth, the shift in energy around him. A sort of respect had taken root on that plane. Quiet but firm. The woman in the suit, who had ordered him to move earlier, peeked from her row in the back. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't imagined that the man she brushed off as useless would be the one everyone was now quietly honoring. She thought about her reaction earlier, the impatience, the sharpness in her tone. She looked down at her lap, her hands fidgeting. She didn't feel proud. At that moment, the flight attendant passed by and paused. She leaned in with a soft smile and asked the old man, "Is there anything we can bring you? A blanket? A pillow?" He shook his head. You've all given me more than enough today." She nodded and walked away. The man beside him asked, "Where are you headed, sir?" "Georgia," the old man replied. "To see someone I haven't seen in a very long time." "Family?" The old man gave a gentle smile. "Kind of. A nurse who helped me walk again when I came home. She wrote me every year. This time, I'm writing back in person." The man nodded, touched by the story. The plane glided smoothly through the sky, but for the old man, it felt like more than a flight. It was something like peace. He had walked through fire, carried wounded men on his back, been forgotten by parades and politics alike. And yet here he was, flying in first class, surrounded by strangers who, without knowing his whole story, had chosen to respect it. All because a pilot noticed. All because someone stood still when the world rushed past. And the old man knew. It wasn't the seat, the class, or the silence that mattered most. It was being seen. Sometimes being seen is the loudest kind of honor. The plane touched down in Georgia just before sunset. Passengers stood and stretched, grabbing bags from overhead compartments. The air buzzed with the soft sounds of goodbyes and impatient feet. Yet the old man remained seated, waiting until the rush faded. The same pilot who had saluted him earlier stepped into the cabin again. He made his way down the aisle slowly with purpose. "Sir," he said gently, "may I help you get off the plane?" The old man looked up, slightly surprised. "You've done more than enough." "I'd still like to," the pilot said with a respectful nod. With care, the old man stood. The pilot held his arm steady, guiding him toward the exit. Other passengers stepped aside without needing to be asked. Once off the plane, the old man paused at the gate area. A wheelchair waited nearby, but he waved it away politely. He wanted to walk. He moved slowly through the terminal. His cane tapped rhythmically against the polished floor, echoing through the space. Each step was deliberate, as though every footfall carried history. Then, near baggage claim, he saw her. A small woman, maybe in her 70s, stood near the edge of the crowd. Her hair was silver. Her glasses sat low on her nose, and she wore a faded pink cardigan that seemed too thin for the cold air conditioning. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if she should still be there. He stopped walking. She looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, time folded in on itself. She covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes filled with tears, but her lips lifted into a trembling smile. "Is it really you?" she whispered. The old man gave a single nod. She took small steps forward. Her knees weren't strong, but her heart was. When they reached each other, she touched his face like she was checking if he was real. "You look the same," she said softly. "I've just slowed down some," he replied with a chuckle. She laughed too, quiet, emotional, full of years unspoken. They stood there for a moment. Two old souls in a crowd of strangers who rushed past them without knowing the depth of what they were witnessing. Then she leaned in and hugged him. It wasn't a long hug. It wasn't tight, but it held everything that needed to be said. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't," he replied. "What changed?" He looked around at the people moving past, the flashing signs, the luggage spinning on the belt nearby. "A young woman told me to move," he said with a faint smile. "But then the world reminded me I still matter." She nodded slowly, understanding, more than he said. She had been the nurse who helped him when he first returned from service. He was broken then, inside and out. She had sat by his hospital bed when others didn't. She read him the news, wrote down letters when his hands shook too much to hold a pen, and made sure someone still looked him in the eyes like a human being. And then, for decades, she wrote to him. He never wrote back, until now. Now he had come. They sat down on a nearby bench. She offered him a wrapped sandwich from her purse. He took it with a smile. They ate slowly, talking about little things, how the weather had changed, how coffee didn't taste the same anymore, how cities felt faster than before. But underneath the small talk was something bigger. Healing. Years of silence faded with each word. She told him her children were grown. Her husband had passed 5 winters ago. She lived in a quiet house now, mostly filled with books and memories. He listened carefully, never interrupting. Then she asked gently, "Will you come stay a while?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, scarred and tired, and then back at her kind eyes. "I think I'd like that," he said. In that moment, the journey wasn't just from one city to another. It was from the past to peace. And peace for some people comes not with medals or noise, but with a warm meal, an old friend, and the courage to say yes after years of silence. The ride from the airport was quiet, but it wasn't awkward. She drove slowly. He sat in the passenger seat, holding the photo he had carried in his coat pocket. Street lights passed them like slow blinks of memory, painting soft orange on the dashboard. The neighborhood they entered wasn't fancy, but it was clean. Neat little homes with white fences, porches, and wind chimes. Her house stood near the end of the street, shaded by an old tree that leaned just slightly to the left, like it had stood against 1,000 storms and never broke. She parked the car and helped him out. He waved away the idea of a wheelchair again, steadying himself with the cane. The front door creaked gently as she opened it. Inside, the house smelled of warm bread and lavender. A clock ticked quietly on the wall. A photo of a younger her stood on a shelf, smiling with her arms around 2 children. "Make yourself at home," she said softly. He took off his coat and folded it neatly. Then, carefully, he sat on the old couch in the living room. The cushions sank under his weight, but he didn't mind. It was the kind of couch that remembered everyone who ever sat on it. She brought him tea. No sugar, just the way he used to like it. "I wasn't sure you'd even remember me," she said as she sat in the chair across from him. "I never forgot," he answered. She looked down at her hands, wringing a napkin slowly. "Then why didn't you write?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the photo from his coat again and handed it to her. She took it carefully, stared at the young faces frozen in time. She recognized them. She had seen them once in letters, maybe even in person. Young men in uniforms, standing tall. Most of them never made it back. "I didn't know how to write about them," he said, "and I didn't know how to talk about coming home when they never did." She understood. Her eyes softened. "They would have been proud of you," she whispered. He nodded slowly. There was a long pause, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Then she stood and walked toward a small wooden drawer. From it, she took out a box. It was wrapped in an old handkerchief. She handed it to him. "I was keeping this for you," she said. He opened it slowly. Inside was a small pin, rusted, but still shining. A medal. His. "I thought I lost this," he said, surprised. "You did," she smiled. "But I found it in a pile of laundry the week you left the hospital." He stared at it for a long time. Then he reached out and placed it back into the box, hands shaking a little. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," she said. Then her voice dropped to a softer tone. "There's something else too. Something I never told you." She stood again, went to her bookshelf, and pulled out a thick photo album. She opened it to a page and held it out to him. There, in a photo taken years ago, was a young boy, maybe 7 or 8, smiling proudly, holding a flag in one hand, and standing in front of the very hospital where they had met. He stared at the boy, confused. "Who's this?" "That's my grandson," she said quietly. "He joined the army last year. He said he was inspired by the stories I used to tell, about a quiet, brave man who never once complained, even when the pain was too much." He looked up slowly. "You told him about me?" "I told him everything," she said. "I wanted him to know what real strength looks like." He sat back in the couch, stunned. His lips moved, but no words came out. A tear rolled down his cheek. Before he could stop it, it wasn't from sadness. It wasn't from guilt. It was from something deeper. Something like healing. All these years he had thought his silence meant his story was forgotten. But it wasn't. It had lived quietly, like a seed planted in someone else's heart. And now, it had grown. The next morning, the sunlight crept in through the thin curtains. Birds chirped outside, soft and steady, as if the world had taken a deep breath overnight. The old man sat at the kitchen table, his cane leaning against the chair beside him. He watched as she moved around the kitchen, placing toast on plates and humming a quiet tune from decades ago. It was a song they used to hear on the radio during his hospital recovery days. He smiled to himself. It was strange how some things ever left you. Still like your eggs plain? She asked. Still do, he answered, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. She placed a plate in front of him and sat across from him with her tea. After breakfast, would you like to go outside? Some folks around here would be happy to meet you. He raised an eyebrow. They don't even know me. They've heard about you, she said, with a mysterious smile. They finished the quiet breakfast, and she helped him step out onto the porch. A cool breeze brushed across his face. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Kids playing in the yards, a man mowing his lawn, someone walking a dog down the street. But then something shifted. One by one, neighbors began to walk toward her front yard. A few carried lawn chairs. Some brought lemonade. Others simply came with soft eyes and unsure hands. The woman from across the street approached first. She carried a photo of her late father, who had also served. She didn't say much. She simply handed it to him and whispered, "Thank you for people like him." He nodded, eyes gentle. Then came a boy, no older than 12, holding a notebook. He had drawn a picture of the old man sitting on a plane with a pilot saluting him. "I saw it on the news," the boy said proudly. "My dad showed me. You were the man in the photo, right?" "I guess I was," the old man said, surprised. He hadn't known the pilot had shared the moment. But it made sense now. It explained why these people looked at him with such quiet honor. The boy handed him the drawing. "I want to be brave like you someday." "You already are," the old man replied, tapping his finger gently against the boy's chest. Right here. More neighbors arrived. Some shook his hand. Others simply nodded. A woman brought flowers from her garden. A man gave him a baseball cap that read, "Respect is earned." The old man didn't know what to say. "I didn't do anything special," he told them. But the nurse beside him placed a hand on his shoulder and said gently, "You showed up. You endured. You carried the weight others didn't. And then you came back with dignity. That's special." As the morning faded into noon, a small folding table was set up. Someone brought cookies. Someone brought music. A low radio station, playing old jazz. The porch turned into something like a gathering space, and he sat in the middle of it, not as a guest, but as a quiet symbol. A man who never asked for recognition, yet somehow received it from people who hadn't even known his name the day before. One of the younger men, tall in his 20s with work boots and strong hands, approached and asked, "Sir, do you still have your medal?" The old man blinked, then slowly pulled the small box from his coat pocket and opened it. The medal lay inside, a little dull but still proud. "Would you mind if I took a picture of it?" the young man asked. "Why?" "My little brother doesn't believe heroes still walk around us," he said. "I want to prove him wrong." The old man chuckled, shook his head gently, and said, "Tell your brother we're still around, we're just a little slower now." The photo was taken. Later that evening, as the crowd slowly drifted home, the old man sat alone on the porch. The nurse sat beside him, holding 2 cups of tea. "They didn't even know me," he said again, still in awe. "They didn't need to," she said softly. "Some people can see what's inside a man just by how he carries himself." He looked at the sky, soft blue fading into gold, and for the first time in years, he felt like something had lifted off his shoulders. Not just the pain, not just the weight of war, but the silence, the being unseen. That part of his life had finally changed. 3 days later, a white envelope arrived at the small house. It didn't look like much. No stamp, no handwriting, just a printed label and a golden seal on the back. The nurse brought it to the old man while he was resting in the porch chair, a blanket over his knees and the sound of wind chimes in the air. "This came for you," she said. He took the envelope carefully, holding it like something delicate. He didn't open it right away. He turned it over slowly, studying the seal. "Looks official," he said quietly. She nodded and sat down beside him, watching as he finally peeled it open. Inside was a formal letter, typed neatly on fine paper. His hands trembled slightly as he read. "To the esteemed veteran of service, we are writing to honor a moment of dignity and courage that has since reached millions. A simple act, your quiet endurance and the respect shown by a member of our airline crew reminded the world of what service, grace, and humility truly look like. In recognition of your military service and the inspiration you continue to offer, we are pleased to inform you that you have been awarded a lifetime flying pass as our honored guest. You will be formally recognized at the Capitol next month during the National Veterans Tribute. A scholarship has been created in your name for underprivileged veterans' families, funded entirely by public donations inspired by your story." He stopped reading. His eyes didn't fill with tears. Not this time. They just stayed still, focused, as if trying to understand how something so quiet, so ordinary had echoed so far. The nurse gently touched his arm. "They made a scholarship in your name," she said. "I never went to college," he whispered. "That's why this matters even more," she replied. He looked down at the letter again. It had spread. His story. Maybe it started with the woman who told him to move. Maybe it was the pilot's salute. Maybe it was the photo someone posted online. But somewhere in that chain of small choices, the world paused and paid attention. And now, kids who had never met him would go to school because of a man they didn't even know existed a week ago. He folded the letter neatly and placed it in his coat pocket, next to the photo of his brothers in arms and the medal the nurse had saved. That evening they sat on the porch again. The sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky with orange and rose. The neighborhood had gone quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of warmth. Lights in windows, laughter from a far-off yard, a bike's wheel clicking as a child rode home. "I used to think being remembered meant having statues," he said softly. She looked at him with kind eyes. "And now? Now I know. Sometimes it's enough to be remembered in a boy's drawing, or in a stranger's heart." He closed his eyes for a moment and let the wind touch his face. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen, heard, and deeply, truly valued, not because he fought, but because despite everything, he returned with quiet honor. 1 week later, the old man stood on a small platform at a quiet schoolyard. There was no grand parade, no marching band, just a flag fluttering in the breeze, rows of students in folding chairs, and a wooden podium with a microphone that squeaked each time someone tapped it. The nurse stood in the front row, hands folded, watching. With a soft smile, her cardigan flapped in the breeze. The principal stepped up and spoke to the students. "Today we honor someone whose story began with silence and turned into something louder than words. This scholarship will help dozens of students over the years. But more than that, we hope his story reminds all of you that kindness, respect, and courage can change lives, even your own." Then, she turned to him. "Would you like to say something, sir?" He hesitated. Public speaking had never been his strength. For years he had lived quietly, avoiding attention. But now, with young eyes watching him and the wind brushing against his worn coat, he slowly walked toward the microphone. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't unfold any notes. He just stood there and began to speak. "I was told to move, once," he said. "Someone looked at me and saw someone who didn't matter. It hurt, not because it was rude, but because I believed it might be true." A hush fell over the students. But then, a pilot saluted me. People paused, and the world reminded me I was never forgotten, and neither are you. He pointed gently toward the crowd. Some of you come from homes where people don't see you. Some of you carry stories no one claps for. But I want you to know, every step you take with kindness, with quiet strength, someone sees it, and one day it will matter more than you think. He paused, then said softly, "The world doesn't always clap for quiet people, but that doesn't mean we stop walking." There was no loud applause, just a long, respectful silence. Then a single student stood, then another, and another, until the entire group of students, all different shapes, colors, sizes, stood together, not because they were told to, but because they understood. Later, after the ceremony, a teacher handed him a small gift. It was a wooden box carved by one of the students. On the top, 3 words were burned into the grain. "You were seen." He ran his fingers gently across the letters. Back at the house that evening, he sat once more on the porch. The nurse placed her chair beside his, both of them watching the sunset. "I never thought I'd live long enough to be honored like that," he said. "You were always worth honoring," she replied. He held the box in his lap. Inside, he'd placed the medal, the boy's drawing from the plane, and the scholarship letter. His story now carried in simple things that mattered. As the sun dropped lower, a neighborhood boy passed by on a bike and waved. "Hi, mister," he shouted cheerfully. The old man waved back, smiling. "See that?" the nurse said. "You're part of this place now." He nodded. "Not just this place, maybe a few hearts too." Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the warmth of the day wash over him. He didn't need monuments. He didn't need headlines. He had something far stronger now. Legacy. And it had started not with noise, but with 9 quiet minutes, and one man's choice to stay standing.